Okay, so as I mentioned earlier with you guys, the thing with Twitter coverage these days is there's a lot more information available to people. How do you feel about that? Is there a problem with it being so readily available?
Well, I mean, we saw stuff like this years ago. There were issues of information availability that sort of influenced the Pro Tour. In Pro Tour New Orleans in I want to say 2002, they actually put all the Day 2 deck lists up on the website. While Day 2 was going on. So anyone who had access to that information had more information than anyone else. There were literally people with laptops looking up people's deck lists before every round that they played. And that's obviously an extreme case. With some of the Twitter coverage now, and people talking about, oh, so-and-so's playing this deck, people who have access to that information, they have an advantage over people who don't. And people who are more likely to be covered on the Twitter coverage, named players who are playing interesting decks, they are more likely to have information about their decks given out to their opponents. So, I mean, there's definitely a cost there.
I noticed that very early on when I started Twittering, or tweeting, or whatever you want to call it, I noticed that I would say something, and then, people in the event would mention having read it, and I'm like, aha, see what's going on here. I need to be careful about, what I say and make sure that I don't tell people what deck I'm playing unnecessarily, and, instead of saying, I drafted this deck, just I drafted a sweet deck.
Yeah, well, I mean, for instance, in Pro Tour San Juan, this is actually how some of this came up. I was posting round by round updates talking about the cool games that I was playing. I mentioned I killed I did 30 to my opponent on turn 5. Yeah.
Right.
And there were people.
What skill are we playing? And then they figure it out.
Yeah. There were people who were clamoring for, oh my god, how's your deck doing this? I was very particular not to give out details of my deck because I don't want that information out there. I want to make it.
Players,
I want to make it exciting for people who are watching. I mean that's really what it comes down to is what the sort of balance is.
And that's obviously always the trade-off, is
what the balance is between the coverage, giving people what they want at home and making it as sort of interactive and interesting for them, versus giving out too much information that could hurt the players.
So I think those of us who are going to be covered are really sensitive to both sides of it. We do want people to be more interested in the coverage and get more by-the-minute coverage. We're also the people who are most likely to have our decks spoiled, and so there are two sides of it that are really relevant and felt, and we're totally sympathetic to both sides, and then it's just about trying to figure out a right balance where you want the coverage to be available, but you'd like it if there was some kind of time delay, ideally. So in a draft approach or something, it's awesome because you can say just a little for a couple rounds, and then after your 3 rounds, it doesn't matter anymore, and you can be all right, this is my deck.
I mean, certainly when we're getting stuff up there, by the time we actually get something posted, it's not really very relevant to the draft, but with Twitter, it's just so instantaneous.
Right. Well, I mean, in Constructed in particular, I mean, it can have such an impact. Even if you don't know the deck list that someone's playing, knowing that that your opponent coming up in the next round is playing even just a control deck. I mean, that can have a huge influence on okay, can I keep this hand? Game 1, I remember for lots of tournaments, people would always scout. There used to be regularly teams of players who would have a list of the standings and go, okay, this person's playing this. For the last rounds of Austin, I did exactly that. I went around and figured out what every single person was playing at the top tables, so I'd know what I was playing against at the beginning of a round. And that can influence the sort of hands that you keep in game 1, and that can have a big impact on the match. And with that sort of information out there on Twitter, I mean, or you can still get it with feature matches, or just who happen to be sitting next to someone, just rumors going around. But Twitter is what makes it so much more easily available to anyone who wants to access.
On the other hand, the fact that you've always been able to do it is kind of an argument that it doesn't really matter. It's just one more way that people who care can get this information.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
I mean, it's just one extra person that you know about, so for people in the tournament, it's not that big a deal. The odds that you actually play against me after reading my tweet are not that high. But on the other hand, from my point of view, I'm the one guy who's saying this is what I'm playing, and so it's going to be bad for me more. So
it has a disproportionate impact on those players who are the name players who people will want to know what they're playing, and I mean, whether the impact of that is a big deal, unclear. It definitely has an impact for those players. But I mean, I personally think that the coverage being entertaining and interesting for people who are watching is very important. I mean, that's the whole reason that the Pro Tour exists, is for people to watch from home. and I think it's, we've seen a lot more interest in the Pro Tour. I think since we've had live coverage, I think there's you see like the people at GG's Live who do they get thousands of viewers for their live coverage, and people complain that sort of live coverage doesn't exist for the Pro Tour. I think that the faster people can get the information and the higher quality of the information, the better. So I think that as long as we're not giving very specific details of decks, I'm probably okay with it.
I mean, ultimately, I think that you just have to. I mean, it's what every industry is figuring out. You just can't stop the flow of information. Like that's the way the world's going to go, and players need to get.
You can't fight the signal.
Is there a line that should be drawn as far as what people are talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Kibler nailed it with like archetype, okay, exact list, no.
Yeah.
Right.
Techie sideboard cards, like best not to mention, but it might get out.
I think that things like that, like in particular stuff like sideboard cards, I think are pretty dangerous because it can have a huge impact. Knowing that someone has a transformational sideboard that they bring in for game 2, it's like, oh well, like if someone's creatureless combo deck, exactly. I mean, those are important things.
Yeah.
So I mean. I think it takes a lot of discretion on the part of the person who's actually doing the reporting.
Right.
So, as to how the best way to sort of proceed is, I don't know. I think that anyone who's going to be doing live coverage of an event needs to be sensitive to these issues and sort of understand the implications of what they're saying. So, and I think that if they want to report on, say, like particular cards that's in a player's deck, they should at least try to get that player to say it's okay first.
Right.
I'd likely be okay with pretty much anything other than my exact deck list going up because I think that sort of investment from the community is really important.
Right.
Other players might be less happy about it. I know. Well, I know it's in once. V was actually really excited that no one who was playing his deck got a feature match round 1 because he didn't want any of that information out there. So I mean, there's different priorities for different players.
Right.
Yeah, and I mean, like, it's exactly like some players will have some cards they don't want people to know about. Like last week, there was one player who was like willing to show his deck, except he was holding 2 cards that he didn't want people to see. Those were the Sagiri Steps in his mono red deck.
Sagiri Steps in his mono red deck.
Unclear whether it's because he didn't want people to know about them or because he was embarrassed about them. But
little from column A. Alright, well, thanks very much, guys. Good luck in the tournament.